This is from Hui Neng, who was the sixth patriarch of Zen, about the 7th century. Clear in speech and thought, like the sun in a cloudless sky. I only teach the instant teaching. I am here to dispel false doctrines. It isn't the teaching that is instant or not, but awareness that is quick or slow. Who studies this instant teaching will never succeed if they're fools. Of the countless ways to explain it, all are based on one rule. In your dark house of affliction, keep the sun of wisdom shining. Wrong views are caused by afflictions. When right views shine, afflictions depart. Where right and wrong don't function, there's nothing left to purify. Enlightenment is already pure. To reflect on it is a delusion. But what is pure is in that delusion. Just break through the 3 walls, which are karma, passion, and delusion. If in this world you follow the way, don't let anything block you. Paying attention to your own mistakes will keep you on the path. I'll stop there. This is from the Platform Sutra. Well, I hope you all are doing well. I hope your practice is going well, or at least going. Particularly those of you who are engaged in the ongo, in the practice period. I'm starting to feel fall in the air. And that is a time for me to remember to slow down and feel a little tinge of coolness in the air. For me, it's an invitation to be still, fall and winter. Slow down, turn inward. Fully inhabit my retreat. Inhabit my practice. So even when it gets dark earlier in the day, to keep the sun of wisdom shining. So I'd like to open this up and invite you to share anything if you have comments or questions, protests, objections.
Everything in me just wants to object to this moment. Say I feel very contrary. I have I had a question. I was trying to, listening to you reading the Platform Sutra, and I had some trouble following along. I got to say, there's a lot in there, I think.
Mm.
But the the part that I was trying to track was the section about the afflictions.
Mm-hmm.
Did I hear wrong views are caused by affliction, and yet affliction is resolved by right view? I'm following. I maybe I'm just trying to follow too much causality or cause and effect, too much logic here, but I was confused by that. What do you make of that? Maybe I'll put it that way.
Let me read it again.
Yeah, thank you.
Wrong views are caused by afflictions. When right views shine, that is, when we have right view, or how I prefer to translate it as wise view. When wise views shine, afflictions depart. So there's something about having a wise view where we see more clearly, we understand more clearly. The metaphor is that there's light, right? That the light dispels darkness. Darkness being, we could say, afflictions in this case. Where right and wrong don't function, there's nothing left to purify. So that, for me, means that when we can get beyond the dualistic thinking, right, wrong, good, bad, that categorization, really when we can get beyond thinking itself, then where there's nothing, there's nothing, there's everything. That's emptiness, that's everythingness. And there's no judgment. There's nothing to judge. There's no separation. It's not me and you or me and it anymore. It's beyond that. That's what he's pointing to when he said, there's nothing left to purify, because there's no subject and object anymore. There's no ego. Does that make a little more sense, Scott?
It does. I still think I'm gonna have to work with it a little bit, but it makes
Oh yeah.
clarified this sort of direction of it. And here, afflictions, are we? I mean, when I should I think of suffering? Should I that that kind of a notion of affliction, or
It's really
rather than physical or
the kleshas, the habitual sort of contents of mind or structures of mind, what we
mm,
often call here the narratives, right? The stories
mhm, mhm,
we tell ourselves. And those stories are, we use human beings use stories to for all kinds of reasons, part of which is to make sense of the world. We we tell a story about something to make sense of it. May or may not, correspond to, you know, what's actually going on. Like think of the stories that we make up when somebody does something to us that we don't like, but you know, we or somebody does something and we don't really kind of understand, we'll make up just automatically we'll make up a story about it to make sense of it. Um, but but those are habits. Doing that itself is a very deeply ingrained habit. So, in shikantaza, sort of what tends to happen is that when we let that sort of when we get still, we sort of let that drop. We invite that. We invite that letting go. We invite that going beyond. Um, and those afflictions are those sort of habitual mental gymnastics that we do. You know, thinking is what is about the most ingrained habit that we have. We're constantly thinking, and we think that's all there is. But when we sit in meditation, we're invited to have a different experience. Doesn't mean that when we sit that's going to happen, but we're sort of like doing our best to set up the conditions to go beyond thinking. So that's what I meant by the instruction at the beginning. Let's sit upright, open and relaxed, in body, in heart, and in mind. That's the invitation. That's the invitation to drop our afflictions, to go beyond our afflictions, to allow the innate light, the innate wisdom to shine through. You know, Hongji went on to say in the next stanzas, enlightenment is already pure. It's already pure. But to reflect on it, to think about it, is a delusion. See, we're trapped again. We're thinking we're trapped again. So it's good. Uh, this is only a small portion of this. Forget what he called it. Uh, oh, he called it the Song of Formlessness. This is part of the Song of Formlessness. But it's some good stuff to reflect on. Even better to experience, but
thank you.
you're welcome. Good question. Thank you.
Hey, Jeffrey, is that from Red Pine?
This is Red Pine's translation, yes.
Okay. Yeah, I've been working on that little book for a couple of years now, or maybe a year and a half now. And I don't recognize that bit, so I guess I'll have to read it again.
Which Red Pine book are you working on?
It's the one with the three sutras.
Oh, uh-huh.
Is that a modified version? Is the Cliff Notes version?
um, this is this is from, I mean, he wrote a book on, I mean, he wrote a very extensive translation and commentary of the Platform Sutra, you know. This is, I think, just taken from that, with
Okay.
without the commentary. This is just the Hui Neng's Platform Sutra itself without the commentary. And I think it's published in a couple of his books. This is from Zen Roots, the first 1,000 years of Buddhism, Chinese Buddhism, or Zen, I should say.
Thank you.
Mhm. But Red Pine is a good, wonderful contemporary translator. Just amazing, beautiful translations. He's still alive, still translating. He lives up in Port Townsend. And he's a wonderful, very down to earth, a funny man. He's a wonderful guy. His name's Bill Porter. Red Pines his book name, translator name.
I forgot a question.
Hey, Joe, yes.
So I was during this week rereading the notes that I took from last week, and a question came up for me. So it's really more related to last week's.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to know if there was a relationship between ego and addiction.
Hmm. That is a wonderful question. Um, Short answer would be yes. The long answer is very long.
Oh.
But um, um, based on what I just said, one way to think about addiction in a wider sense might be an unhealthy habit, or a habit, a behavior that sometimes works out, but sometimes doesn't. And I would say that we are actually all addicts. We're all addicted to thinking. Every one of us. It's something that we just do. And sometimes it works out okay, and other times it really causes a great deal of suffering. In As it relates to ego specifically, in the psychological sense of ego, of a sense of self, a diminished sense of self, a small sense of self. Ego is a collection of stories. It's a collection of narratives. And if we practice, if we do this particular practice, if we do a meditation practice and we start to um, observe and look at these stories, like one of the first things when we begin to meditate is we realize that, oh my goodness, my mind is so active, it's always thinking. That's one of the first realizations that people have. And when they sit down for the first time and that happens, and then they think, oh, meditation's not for me. I can't do this. I was thinking the whole time. I'm doing it wrong, you know, which is not true, of course. But so initially there's that realization. Then we sit some more and we start to recognize the patterns. We start to recognize the voices, the members of the committee, as it were, you know, all of those stories that we tell ourselves over and over again about ourselves, about other people, you know, about the world. And then we start to see that, oh, these are patterns that keep coming up over and over again. And when you begin to look very closely, in a very granular way, at these narratives that we tell ourselves, you know, what we call the ego, or the self, it feels really solid until you start to really look closely at it. Then you realize it's just a collection of stories loosely woven together. And then you look and you follow the stories as it comes up in your mind, and you're like, it's just, there's nothing to it. It's not solid at all. So if you stick around with this practice, you begin to poke and investigate a little bit. You poke at this aspect of the ego and you poke at that aspect of the ego. You know, you take a story. Oh, I'm terrible at giving speeches. I'm terrible at talking to a crowd. You know, maybe you look back and maybe it was challenging like 8 times, but there were those 2 times that you did all right, right? So that story, oh, I can't speak in public. I can't, you know, I can't do that. It really, when you look closely, it's not true. And we can do that and encourage you to do that in your practice. Notice where it's originating, where all of this is originating from, where our thoughts come from. And try and find a location. You probably can't. And then maybe contemplate where you are, you know. Really observe closely. And you may find that it's also hard to precisely pin down where that is. So that notion of ego that we depend on and carry around and practice, my friend and Dharma brother Joe called the ego my something like my most faithful practice. Because it's something that we do habitually and automatically. And oftentimes it works for us, but there are many times it gets in the way, and many times it harms us to hold on to that. And I think that sort of addiction and ego kind of, that's sort of where they can meet, you know, and that's kind of where we can practice with each of those, is looking at the habitual nature of our thought and our narrative, and how we actually create the self. I call it selfing. It's a verb, selfing. We're constantly selfing. We're constantly telling these stories about ourselves and others in the world. And I think that, well, my experience is that that's very limiting. It's damaging when we stay in that, when we believe that. We just have a thought and we believe it, just carte blanche. We just have the thought and believe it's true, and we don't investigate. Right? That's where we get so caught up, like an addict. It's so caught up. You know, the world of an addict is very small. It's very small. It centers around that obsession, that mental obsession. And thinking is that way. From this perspective, thinking is a mental obsession. So, I don't know if that directly sort of gets at what you were asking, Joe, but
I think it does.
okay. Well, it's nice when that happens. Thank you for asking. Very interesting question. Anybody else have any comments or questions?
So I have a question as a result of that.
Mm-hmm.
Is how do we shift thinking to not be an addiction?
I don't know that that's possible. I think it's something that uh, uh, it's difficult to transcend. It's just a fact. You know, I'm in my everyday life. I'm thinking right now. I'm in my addiction right now. You know, it's not, you know, it's not categorically bad. It's not categorically good. It just sort of is. You know, I've said this a couple of times. Suzuki Roshi's, yeah, it was Suzuki Roshi, who said, we need just enough ego to not get hit by a bus. You know, that's about how much we need. We have a lot more than that. I have a lot more than that. So, so I take these opportunities, like in meditation, to set it aside to the degree that I'm able. Sometimes when I meditate, my thoughts are just intrusive. It's like I can't, the mind won't stop thinking. Sometimes it's like that. Other times, thoughts cease. But I don't know, I don't know that I would want to get rid of all thought permanently, you know? Maybe, don't know.
Aren't you looking for wise thoughts? Not right thoughts or wrong thoughts, wise ones.
There are wise thoughts, thoughts imbued with wisdom, but I would say that wisdom is beyond thought.
I really love this comparison or this kind of like analogy of addiction, or the way of looking at this as addiction, because I was just thinking there are addictions where complete abstinence is not possible. People are like overeaters or things like that, where you need to have food, you need to have sustenance.
Mhm.
So the mindfulness is really, as I understand it, core to that type, or to one for spending for people who debt.
Mhm.
Mindfulness is, and just like kind of like awareness, clarity, is key to that. Or I don't know if that's the right word, but that's what I'm going to use. And then and just presence.
Mhm.
The kind of practice that we do exercise here, just being present in the moment, because there is that sort of, like you said, like Suzuki Roshi, there's a balance.
Mhm.
And if you're like me, in many things, I tend to go way to one side or way to the other side.
Mhm.
And so, for, this analogy is so fruitful, just the idea, because it comes right down to grasping and aversion,
Mhm.
and grasping and aversion to those things that match our story, grasp,
Mhm.
or the things that break our story, avoid.
Right.
The things that that help us sort of numb to the things that would destroy our story, grasp. you know
Mhm.
and the people who would tell you to stop having your stories, go away. This is such a like, to me it's like, what a great analogy. So this, I don't know what I was doing for my practice period before, but I think this is where I'm going to focus. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, sometimes stories take over, then they become obsession,
Mhm.
and it's like an impediment of going on or carrying on with the day even.
Yeah. Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah. We're so much more than our stories. We're so much more. But if you know, the problem is we believe them. That's the problem. You know, in addiction, if we're talking about a substance, particularly, it's easier to understand. You take the substance, it alters your perception. Makes it quote unquote easier, right? Puts a puts a puts a barrier in between you and the difficulty or the harshness of life. You keep doing that and you keep doing that. What is so insidious about that process is that there comes a point where you start to believe you need that substance in order to deal with life. It's so insidious and so undermining. And what I'm suggesting is that when we hold on to those stories about ourselves, our identity, how we identify, then it starts to become a real obstacle and impediment. It starts to harm us when we do that. I am this, I am that. We're more than that. Far, far more than that. Well, thank you all for your effort and your intention, your practice. Wonderful questions, comments, shares. I appreciate the opportunity to have this time together and wonder about what it is that we're doing together. But it's a wonderful opportunity and support. Sangha can be a real refuge. And I appreciate that. I just want to note that. So let's keep going. Let's keep practicing. And next week, let me check my calendar. Next week is the last Wednesday of the month, so we will do guided metta next week, or some other guided meditation. But we'll do a guided meditation next week.
Looking forward to that, Jeffrey.
Very good. Well, have a wonderful, safe week, and I will look forward to seeing you all next week.
Thank
Good
you. Good night.
Thank
Bye,
you,
everyone.
Jeff. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
No,
Good night.
Thank you.
thank you.